Hello, my friends. Welcome to the Indigo Women podcast. My name is Natalie, and today we are going to be talking about light work, shadow work, and healing mindfully. And I feel like the timing of this topic is super perfect because I will be reaching 3 years of full-time self-employment in just a few days. On August 20th, it will be my 3-year anniversary of being a full-time self-employed coach and mentor. And man, what a cool 3 years it's been. And I've definitely already gotten into reflection mode about it. Today is a new moon, so new moons are reflections anyway, but really going into what it means to have been a full-time coach and mentor for 3 years. And I think that reflecting on this topic of light work and shadow work is just perfectly aligned. So I'm very excited to be talking about this with you today. Before I dive in, I would love to make this conversational, so please feel free to throw your comments into the chat. I will get back to you with them once this live stream is over. And also it might inspire a follow-up video or a follow-up podcast episode, because trying to talk about light work and shadow work and all of its nuances within 40 minutes is a little daunting. I'm hoping that we can cover everything that I want to cover in such a short period of time. But if for some reason I feel like I'm getting a little long-winded, we'll go ahead and do a second episode on this topic. So it was really fun to put out there today that this is what we're going to be covering and receiving your questions. You guys had a lot of really awesome questions that I'm excited to address. And the first thing that I want to do is I want to define what light work is and what shadow work is. And then I'm going to tell you my personal story with both. So please keep in mind that everything that goes on within this podcast episode is going to be my own personal opinion, my personal truth, and my own personal experience. As I mentioned, I've been a coach and mentor for 3 years now, so I do have experience both facilitating and receiving light work and shadow work modalities. I also have a background in psychology, so all of that is going to be woven into my story, but please keep in mind that a lot of this really is based on my own personal experience, my own insights. And the thing about shadow work and light work is that they are very ambiguous terms. Shadow work has a bit more of a definition to it because of the psychological history of the term shadow work, whereas light working is a little bit more open-ended. It tends to be a bit more ambiguous. We'll just keep using that word. So I'll be sharing my own definitions of these terms and how I personally use them in my practice. So let's go ahead and talk about shadow work first, because shadow work does have a history in psychology. It was first coined by Carl Jung, who is one of the forefathers of modern psychology. He was a student of Sigmund Freud, who was his own brand of genius, we'll say, in quotes. Sigmund Freud was his own thing. But I actually really, really love Carl Jung. He was one of my favorite psychologists to learn about in school because he had really cool ideas that were connected to the spiritual realms, whether he realized it or not. So not only did he coin the phrase shadow work, but he also coined the phrase the collective conscious. So Carl Jung was one of the first psychologists to recognize this idea that all humans seem to be part of this collective conscious cloud. And it was his theory that this collective consciousness was why certain things would happen across the entire globe with groups of people who were not physically connected to one another, because there's some underlying fabric that connects all of us. And now with quantum physics and all the amazing science that has been coming out over the last few decades, we can see that that's super true. We are all connected. We are all part of source energy. But Carl Jung was able to define that in psychological terms back in the day, which was great. He's also the person who created the whole Myers-Briggs personality, 16 personality sort of test. I don't think that he fully refined it. I don't think that he was the one that actually made the test itself, but he did start defining those 16 personalities. Carl Jung was an INFJ. I know there's lots of INFJs in my circle. So he was one of the very introspective and very deep people. So that's Carl Jung. I think he's cool. Jungian psychology is one of my favorites because it did feel, compared to the other types of work that psychologists of that time did, there was a lot of experimentation that was going on that wasn't ethical, because there were no ethics in psychology at the beginning, and there was a lot of damage that was done. But what I loved about Carl Jung is that he seemed to be a little bit less interested in doing some of the more behavioral experiments that psychologists such as B.K. Skinner did. And so that's why I have a bit of a soft spot for Carl Jung. He was in no way perfect, but I felt that he was a step in the right direction. So Carl Jung is credited for creating the term shadow work, and shadow work in its essence, it just means taking the subconscious and bringing it into the conscious. So it's interesting how the phrase shadow work has changed a lot over the last several years. I feel that there's a lot of healers who have taken the word or the phrase and have just kind of ran with it in whatever direction they want to. But at its core, at its essence, at its original definition, it was simply taking those parts of ourselves that are in the shadows and bringing them into the light. That's what shadow work is. So if you can think of our mind, our subconscious mind is like the bottom of the iceberg that is just submerged in water. So depending on who you talk to, anywhere from 95 to 99.5% of our thoughts are going on subconsciously. We are not consciously aware of them. Again, depending on who you talk to, our conscious mind can actually hold a very, very finite amount of information. So if you want to talk about the school of thought that is neurolinguistic programming, there is this idea that about 2 million bits of information are happening subconsciously every second, and we can only hold 126 bits consciously in our mind. How they got that number, I have no clue, but it does show the ratio of what is happening below the surface versus what we can actually grasp with our conscious mind. So most people who have any sort of introspection or any sort of curiosity towards the self has done shadow work without even realizing that they're doing it. So anytime that you look at your conscious thoughts, or you look at your behaviors, or you look at your triggers, or you look at something that you do automatically and you stop and you ask yourself, why do I do that? Or why do I think that way? Or where did that come from? You're doing shadow work. It's because you're going back, you're going under the surface, you're going deeper, and you're looking at things that are running subconsciously in your mind. So where does all that subconscious programming come from? It comes from so many places. It's everything. Like everything is happening in our subconscious. So one of the things that happens in our subconscious mind is our breathing. It's our heart rate. It's the way that our cells are healing themselves, the way that our stomachs digest. This is all happening in our subconscious mind. All of these body functions are happening subconsciously. From a behavioral perspective, there's a ton of wiring. There's a ton of stuff that's going on in our subconscious mind that's there because of experiences that we had when we were children, or things that adults said to us when we were growing up. So that also informs what is going on in our subconscious thoughts. There's the societal programming. So where did you grow up? What time period did you grow up? There's so many environmental factors that end up influencing our subconscious mind. And there's really no way to get all of our subconscious into our conscious. There's just not enough room. Like you can even just picture that there's like this giant mansion and you only have access to the foyer, which is like a 5 foot by 5 foot square, right? Like it's just there's so much information in there, and we can really only have access to a small bit of it at a time. So when we're doing shadow work, we're taking those old bits, well, maybe not even old, it might even just be happening in the present moment, but we're taking all of the submerged bits of information and we're bringing them forward so that we can look at them and potentially change them and alter them. So that right there, even just the act of becoming aware of subconscious thoughts is shadow work. There's plenty of schools of thought, especially if we're talking about the spiritual realms. So in yogic and Buddhist philosophies, where healing simply comes from being aware. You don't have to do anything else. You can just pull the stuff from the subconscious into the conscious, and that awareness is enough for you to heal it. Awareness is always going to be the first step with shadow work. It's always going to be the first thing that facilitates the healing. And of course, there's more things that you can do to work with your thoughts and behaviors and actions and ideas once they are conscious, but just bringing it from the shadows into the light is the essence of shadow work. That's the summary of it. So the opposite, and it's not an opposite really, it's truly just a complement to shadow work, is light work. So a lot of people who facilitate light working tend to be talking about universal life force energy, Reiki, higher self-consciousness, flow state, spirit guides, things that help us to elevate out of the human drama and into that collective consciousness. So, for example, the reason why we perceive darkness and shadow and difficult emotions in the first place is because we are human and we are tethered to an ego, which is just chock full of fun human emotions. And I say that sarcastically and silly, but being a human is actually a really fucking cool and beautiful experience that our souls get to have, even though it doesn't always feel like it's the greatest thing. But it is a finite experience that our souls have the privilege of having, and that's really cool. But the idea is that the reason why we're experiencing emotion in the first place, whether it's difficult or not, is because we are tethered to this human body. And this human body it's filled with ego. It is guided by ego, and it's also guided by higher self-consciousness. It's guided by both. We have both a human solid ego self, and we also have a higher self-consciousness that is connected to the universe, to source, to God, whatever it is you want to call it. If you start to get really deep into a lot of these philosophies, Eastern philosophies like the Tao and all this, it's this idea that we actually are God, every last one of us, and that there is no separation. It is simply an illusion that we're separate in the first place. So when we're talking about light working, we're talking about remembering that we are connected to everything and that we actually are light and that shadow is illusion. Now, this is where I want to throw in my personal story, because even just based on those definitions of what is shadow work and what is light work, you might notice that there's a time and a place for each of these things. So I will tell you right off the bat from my own personal experience that this idea of transcending the human experience and remembering your lightness is not going to be effective when you are in the throes of trauma, when you are in a do or die survival situation. This whole stepping out of the humanness, stepping out of the ego, it's not going to serve you, because your ego exists for you to survive. Being in that ego state while you are surviving is a very good thing. It's going to keep you in your human body, which is what we're trying to do, which is what the ego is all about. The ego serves an incredible purpose for survival. You need that in those moments. But then once the threat has passed and the nervous system has had a chance to heal and recalibrate, which can take a really long time, and I'm going to go into that in just a minute, that is when light working can potentially be effective, but I don't recommend doing it before then. So let me backtrack a bit and tell you my own personal story with these two healing modalities. So as you all know, most likely, or not, maybe you don't know, but I studied art therapy and psychology. I have a 4-year degree, and my intention was to become an art therapist, but unfortunately they ended up changing the requirements, and I would need a master's degree, which would have required 3 more years of relearning what I had just learned and a heck ton of money that I wasn't interested in investing. So instead, I decided to become a yoga teacher and practice trauma-informed yoga and essentially use yoga as a therapy, both for myself and for the students that I taught. And this was where my own personal healing journey really started to take off. Yoga and studying psychology were the basis of my own personal healing when I was in my late teens and early 20s. I had quite a bit of trauma from childhood, and there was a lot of survival mode that was going on. I had an eating disorder, generalized anxiety. I know that this is a repeat for a lot of you guys who've been around for a while, but it's important for me to share that this experience of being so overwhelmed by subconscious programming that I didn't understand ended up being a massive catalyst for the growth that I'm able to enjoy today. So it all started in this very dark space of me having a very, very messed up relationship with food, having crazy anxiety, difficulty sleeping, all that good stuff, and not understanding why. But fortunately, because I studied what I studied and because I also got into yoga, those two things together really helped me to bring all of that subconscious programming forward so that I could look at it and actually do something with it. And I would even say that the first 5 or 6 years of my healing journey really was based on shadow work, because it was this constant investigation of my own mind of, why do I act this way? Why do I have these fears? Why is it impossible to sleep? Why can't I eat anything without counting the calories? Why is this such an obsessive compulsive thing for me? And where is it all coming from? And it was because I had this investigative nature of my subconscious mind that I was able to bring all of this subconscious wiring forward, and I could look at it. And it was intimidating. Let me please tell you that shadow work is not for the faint of heart. And I commend every last one of you that has ever attempted or is currently doing your shadow work, because taking the time to go back deep into the recesses of your mind and pull all of that gunk forward so that you can actually do something with it is not for the faint of hearts. And it is the opposite of having a victim mentality. There's a lot of people in this world who have victim mentalities of, all of this terrible stuff happened to me, and now this is just the way that I am. And people who do shadow work do not have that. People who do shadow work are going, oh my God, so much happened to me, but I know that there's something that I can do about it. And I am empowered enough to look at myself and ask those deep questions of, what can I do now? Okay, this crap happened. Yuck. I have so many feelings about it, but I want to change it. I want to heal it. I want to bring it forward so that I can process it and make it what I want to be. I'm taking control of my own reality. And that's huge. And I want to commend anybody who's ever done that work. So personally, I started working with a few therapists. I finally landed on my all-time favorite therapist, Valerie, and she was the perfect match for me because she had 25 years of experience working with trauma survivors. And I will say that anybody who wants to do deep shadow work, please search for a mental health professional who specializes in trauma. There's actually, in my opinion, a disturbing amount of mental health practitioners who are not fully aware of trauma, which to me is wild, because the more that I learn about trauma, the more I realize that trauma is really the foundation of a lot of issues. So many issues, probably more issues than anybody could realize. So the idea of there being mental health practitioners out there who are not well versed in trauma is a little wild to me. So please do your research and make sure that you are choosing someone who specializes in trauma. And fortunately, I was led to Valerie just through the grapevine. I had a friend who mentioned that she knew someone who was a licensed clinical counselor, but also very well versed in the spiritual realms and I don't know if she is a shamanic practitioner, but in my experience, yes, we've done shamanic stuff together. So I was very drawn towards Valerie. And once I started working with her, I knew that that was exactly the person that I wanted to do this very, very deep shadow work with. So we did go deep and we did start bringing all of these things to the surface. And what I started to realize over time was that what needed to happen first and foremost was nervous system repair. So as I said before, the definition of shadow work, according to Carl Jung, is that we're making the subconscious conscious, right? So that's what's happening in the mind. But what about in the body? What about in the rest of your system? Everything is all connected. Your whole body is connected. There are more neurons in your gut than there are in your brain. They call the gut the second brain. I kind of think the gut's the first brain, and then our brain is our second brain, actually. But we need to make sure that even though, yes, this is all happening in our thoughts, it also needs to happen in our bodies. So shadow work, I would say that the second level is that nervous system repair, which needs to happen physically. So that was my first mission when I first started coaching, because it was something that I had done a lot on myself. And it was the perfect marriage between yoga and psychology. So once you bring all of the gunk forward and you look at it, it needs to be repaired. And focusing on that nervous system repair is so helpful for creating that whole body integration. One of the very best ways to repair your nervous system is through therapy and through validation. So the way that our nervous systems are designed is that we're very, very social creatures. I think one of the most impactful things that I've read recently was that when mammals are born, they are born being able to do the thing that they need to do to survive. So for example, a giraffe is born and it can run like an hour later, right? When humans are born, what do? We ask for help. That is the number one thing that humans can do when they're born, and we do it. And we have to, because that is how human beings survive. So when it comes to nervous system repair, one of the most practical things that we can do is share our stories with another human who holds space for us and validates our experience. So specifically for people who have been through abuse or who have chronic PTSD or who have been through long-term gaslighting or anything that skews your reality, it is really, really important to have that therapeutic space where you can share your story over and over and over, and the other person can validate you and help you put the pieces back together within your story. So when it comes to shadow work and bringing the subconscious into consciousness and then also repairing the nervous system, that component of therapeutic validation is huge. It repairs on a physical level. And I think a lot of people don't recognize that. I remember when I went to my first few therapists that I didn't resonate with as much, I got a little frustrated because I didn't feel like we were actually doing anything. I just felt like I was telling my story and they were just listening. And I was like, this is silly. Why am I paying you money? But then once I learned about trauma integration and I learned about the vagus nerve and I learned that humans actually repair one another by listening to each other and validating each other, seeing and hearing and mirroring each other, I started to realize, oh my God, there is a merit to talk therapy. Do I wish that every therapist explained that to their patients? Yes, absolutely. I think a lot more people would stick around in therapy if they knew that the part of therapy where they're sitting there and they're just telling their story and the therapist is sitting there validating them and, just listening, that in itself is a very important shadow work, and it's foundational. That is very, very foundational to this practice of integrating the shadow. So then what happens after that? So a lot of people that came into my circle when I was a shadow work practitioner were people who had been in therapy for a really long time, and they started to feel as though at first therapy was really helpful, but then they plateaued. And that is how it tends to go in my experience. There tends to be a plateau if you are only doing the talking and the validating with the nervous system repair. can get you somewhere, but I personally don't think that it can get you all the way. I do think that there needs to be physical movement within the nervous system as well. There needs to be physical repair. So this is where the focus on embodiment can really come in handy. So when I'm saying embodiment, I'm talking about yoga, I'm talking about breath work, I'm talking about tapping. If anyone's ever done EFT tapping, that stuff is so powerful. I'm talking about acupuncture, acupressure, not medical massage, well, medical massage, sure, but therapeutic massage, or any sort of somatic expression. There's a lot of healers that will facilitate somatic expression where you're able to release the trapped emotions from past experiences, whether through crying or laughing or screaming, or getting those energies up and out of your nervous system, releasing them from your body through expression. You can do cord cutting, setting boundaries. There's so many ways that you can create that deeper shadow work to help you heal your nervous system. And this is the work that I used to do. So this was where we would start going really, really deep into that shadow integration, because it's going past the story, and it's going past the validation, and it's going into the physical repair of the body. And this is all so crucial and so important. And I would argue that these really are the first 3 steps of healing from trauma. So if you have gone, and please, again, personal experience, like I just want to do that little disclaimer, but this is what I have seen for myself and also for others that really, really works. It's taking the time to create that repair by having space held for you within a safe environment, and then starting to work on the physical nervous system and really putting the energy into feeling safe within your body once again. So to very briefly explain how trauma works and why this part of the process, the shadow work part, is so important, is because when we go through a traumatic event, we think we're going to die. We're either going to die physically, emotionally, or spiritually. And it's just one of those things where we go, I'm going to die. On some level, I'm going to die. And our nervous system immediately, as it should, goes into protective mode. And so we either fight, or we run away, or we freeze, or we people please and we fawn, or whatever it is that we need to do in order to survive, in order to get to the other side of it. But what happens is that even when the threat is gone, if we have an overactive nervous system, we're going to keep feeling like we're threatened, even when there isn't a threat. That's what triggers are. So triggers are when other things happen after that initial threat is gone that makes us go, oh my God, I'm going to die. But we're not, because it's not the actual threat. It's just something that reminds us of the threat. And this is where the trauma integration and the nervous system repair is crucial, and it needs to be repaired on that physical level so that we can feel safe in our bodies once again. This is where the light working comes in. Now, I am going to say that it is possible to overlap the two. There can be light working going on in tandem with shadow work. And it needs to be done very, very mindfully, because light working can be triggering if your nervous system is still very, very active and very, very elevated. So my personal story with this was that several years ago, I hired a life coach. I had loved working with Valerie, and in retrospect, I should have just kept working with her, but I wanted to try something new. And this woman was referred to me. So I was like, oh, okay, my best friend had a really good time with her, and it all worked out. And she specializes in this one particular issue that I want to work on. So I'm going to hire her. So I hired her. And unfortunately, this particular coach had the best intentions in the world, as they all do. She was a light worker, and she was very much focused on what I was talking about earlier, which is stepping out of your human self and connecting to the higher self energy, connecting to source. But the problem was that my nervous system was not in a place to receive that yet. So what ended up happening is I was getting really triggered and re-traumatized from our sessions because I would go to her with a very real concern of mine. One of the issues that I was working on healing from was my own perception of reality. Unfortunately, because of a lot of gaslighting, I was having trouble trusting myself and trusting my own ability to see reality clearly because I had had too many moments where I was told that my reality was warped or not what I thought it was. So at that point in my healing journey, what my nervous system needed was my reality to be validated. I needed to be able to go to someone and say, hey, this is what I'm seeing. This is what I'm feeling. Is that okay that I see and feel this way? And I needed someone on the outside to be like, yes, it's okay to feel that way. Yes, you're totally justified. That's completely valid. It's all right. And my nervous system would have been, oh, okay, good. Thank God. Thank you. Now I can feel safe again. And there is that point in our journey. Most of us who have been through anything traumatic need that. We need however long that takes. Maybe it's a year, maybe it's 10 years, where we just need to be validated in our personal reality in order to feel safe in our bodies. Unfortunately, this particular coach, when I would say to her, like, this is what's going on and this is how I'm feeling and this is what's happening, she'd go, well, just step out of it then. Just don't think that way then. Pick something else. And I was like, no, because unfortunately, with my history of being gaslit, having those moments of, well, just shift out of it then. Just pick a different thought. Just choose something else. That was really not what I needed to hear. Now, in retrospect, do I think that she was incorrect? No, I really don't. I think that she had some really good points because there are certain things you can do to shift out of ego state. You can absolutely break an emotional state. You can absolutely go, you know what, ego, not today. I'm going to get back into flow. 100% you can do that. But if your nervous system is in a space where that isn't what you need, it's going to feel really jarring. And it could even be a little bit re-traumatizing. So this is why I think that it needs to be done very, very mindfully. So what type of light working can be congruent or can be complementary to shadow work? In my experience, Reiki is a huge one. If you have never received Reiki before, I highly recommend it. It's very gentle. It's very quiet. That's what's beautiful about it. A proper Reiki practitioner will not be talking to you. They will not be putting their own agenda onto you. If you have a very talkative Reiki practitioner, maybe find a new one. But what's beautiful about Reiki is that if you find a practitioner who is in alignment with that higher self-consciousness, they will be able to just share that beautiful universal light energy with you silently, and you can take what you need from it. It also works on the vagus nerves in the same way that having that conversation does. So as I mentioned before, when we're focusing on repairing our nervous system, having those conversations with a trusted therapist is very, very healing for the nervous system. So is healing touch. So is Reiki. It doesn't need to be a conversation. It can even just be someone there with their hands on you with good intention flowing through their bodies. That can be extremely healing for your nervous system. So I highly recommend that. It's also possible to give Reiki to yourself, even if you've never been attuned. So if you go on YouTube and you look up a Reiki meditation or like self-healing Reiki or something like that, you can be guided through tapping into that energy. It essentially has to do with just tapping in through the crown chakra and bringing it into your heart and allowing that energy to spread throughout your body. So that's also very, very complementary light work. You can also ask your spirit guides to come in and help you. You can talk to the archangels. There's a lot of different things that can be done in that realm. There's also, if you're feeling ready for it, and again, this is one of those things where you really have to ask yourself, am I ready? You can start finding purpose in what happened to you in the past. And this can be touchy. This is one of those light working things that is like, if you're still in full on PTSD mode, and if your nervous system is still really activated, it sometimes it's not only super difficult to find purpose, but it can be damaging to try to find purpose at that point. You're not ready yet. It isn't there yet. You're still focused on the repair and focused on the healing. The purpose can come later. So that's one of the light working tactics that can come at a later date once the nervous system is repaired. While you're still in the repairing process, you can always focus on giving gratitude. You can focus on giving offerings. You can focus on intention setting. So especially on a day like today, where it's the new moon and you want to set an intention for your higher self-consciousness or connecting to flow state, things like that. These are all really safe things that you can do as light working, as a complement to the shadow work. So when I'm talking about light working after shadow work, that's when we start doing a lot of the consciousness shifting. That's when we really start focusing on the higher self-consciousness and the flow state. So let me explain what I mean by that. I also glanced at the clock and realized, oh no, I'm talking for a long time. So I'm going to try to close this up quickly, but I do want to talk about what light working looks like after nervous system repair. The first question is, how do you know that you have reached nervous system repair? So nervous system repair tends to show itself very slowly and very quietly. It's not like one day you wake up and you go, oh my God, I'm fine. I mean, maybe you will, but typically it's something that kind of comes in as a bit of a tickle. And what I've learned from both my own experience and from the experiences of several of my clients is that there starts to be this feeling of, first of all, I'm tired. I've been working on myself for a really long time. And second of all, do I really need to keep trying to fix everything? Like, I've been doing and I've been working and I've been trying for a really long time. And I actually feel pretty good. I would really like whatever's next. Like, there has to be something else, right? Because yes, of course, I'm going to keep healing my whole life. I have an ego. So as long as I have an ego, there's always going to be something to work on. But this active healing, this constantly feeling like I need to fix myself, it's getting kind of old. And it doesn't really like give me the same joy that it used to. And I actually think that I've done most of the heavy lifting. And I would actually like to really reap the benefits of all the healing that I've done. But I don't really know how to turn it off, because this active fixing and this active healing and this active trying to put myself together has just become a habit at this point. It's just something I've always done. If I get triggered by something, then I immediately dive into my childhood and try to figure out what is my inner child trying to say to me. And I spiral for a while into all these deep memories and all these things. And I'm just kind of sick of doing that. Like, there has to be something else. What's next? And that's where the big shift light working comes in. So this is the work that I'm actively doing now. This is where I come in with the Awaken Indigo activation, for example, and we really take a moment to shift out of the constant doing and the creating the remembering that you actually are whole and you always have been. And of course, this is something that you're not going to be prepared to receive when the nervous system is still really, really active. But when the nervous system is calm, when we can get into that state of being, that's when we can start remembering, wait a minute, I have actually been light all along. Wait a minute, the shadow was always an illusion. Wait a minute, there's purpose in my suffering. Oh gosh, there's something that can be created from this. Oh wow, I can actually remove some of these limiting beliefs. I can actually let go of these beliefs that I acquired a long time ago, but I don't need them anymore. They're staying active in my mind for some reason, but like, I really don't need them. They're not actually helping me survive. They're not actually keeping me safe anymore. There was a point in my life where believing that I wasn't enough was keeping me safe and alive, but I've passed that and I'm ready to get that up and out. So this is where like big shift light working comes in. And that's what I work on now. So this is a lot of the neurolinguistic programming for those limiting beliefs. This is that light working from the heart center. This is where we get that Reiki flowing. This is where we do the clinical hypnosis and we clear out the stuff that it's just empty boxes now. It's like you did the work unpacking, like you went through that mansion, you got everything up and out, you brought it all into the foyer, you looked at it, you decided to keep it or toss it, you've organized it, you've done the whole thing. Now let's get all those empty boxes out of your mind so that you can connect to flow. You can connect to higher self-consciousness and just live there. And of course, you're still going to have human experiences. There's still going to be moments where the ego goes, hey, don't forget, you are being human right now, and I am here for a reason, and I have to teach you another lesson because that's my job. And then you go, okay, ego, sure. And then you come down, you do the ego lesson, and then you go right back into flow state because that's your natural state. That's your birthright. That is where all the abundance comes from. That's where all the joy comes from. That's where everything flows, and you just get to be in peace whenever the heck you want to. The channel is open and it's ready for you. But what I hope that I was able to illustrate within this podcast, and I'm very excited to see what your comments are and hear your feedback on this, is to illustrate that there really is a method, there really is a step-by-step foundational process of healing so that you're not re-traumatizing yourself by doing something too soon. And you're also not bypassing very important parts of the human experience in order to just get to the other side, just get it over with already. Like, we never, ever want to do that. All of these pieces that I talked about, everything from having that first moment of, wait a minute, I don't want to be a victim anymore, I actually want to take this into my own hands, to repairing your nervous system in therapy, to repairing it even deeper with embodiment practices, to introducing the Reiki and the light working and introducing these ideas that you can connect to God consciousness whenever you want, to getting to that point where you realize, hey, wait, I'm done doing all this work. I'm actually done trying to fix myself all the time, to taking that leap into through me consciousness, into as me consciousness, where you realize that you are the universe and the universe is you. And this whole thing is just a blank slate that you get to play with. I hope that you can see that it is important to take all of the lessons from each of these stages, to really suck the juice out of every little bit that this human experience has to offer and that the healing experience has to offer, because they're all important. The process of nervous system repair, the process of shadow work is going to give you so many gifts. It's going to show you so much about who you are. It's going to bring people into your life that connect with you on a deep soul level. The number of people that came into my life when I started doing shadow work, and specifically the more recent shadow work that I did, those are people that are with me for life, because we got to walk next to each other as we cleaned up those last little shards of glass, or as we continue to do so. And it's going to lead you into the light. That's the beauty of shadow work, is that shadow work eventually leads you into the light, because eventually you'll get to the point where you're going to look at yourself and you're going to go, you know, my healing is not my purpose. My healing showed me my purpose, but I can actually relax now, and I can actually enjoy, and I can focus on pleasure, and I can focus on balance and peace and creativity, and just being in this space where I remember that I am source and I remember that I'm love. And yes, I will still forget. That's part of the adventure, but I know that ultimately I am all of this, and all of this is me. And that is how this works. In my personal experience, that is how this works. All right, my friends, thank you so much for tuning in today. I hope that you enjoyed this podcast episode. It was very fun to talk about. And it was also very reflective for me, because I get to celebrate my 3-year anniversary in just a few days. Super exciting. So if you are not yet following us on social media, please feel free to join the Indigo Women Facebook group if you're not in there already. Follow us on YouTube. That's where all of our podcast episodes are hosted. You can also find us on Instagram at the Indigo Women. And once again, my name is Natalie. Thank you so much again for tuning in today, and I'll see you next week. Have a great day. Bye.